it's a basket of different requirements. And when approaching the Asia Pacific and trying to look at what people want to watch, you really have to think of it like that some things are going to work in one place and some things are going to work in other places. Nothing is forbidden completely, but you just have to find the right audience for it.
Welcome to Global VID, a podcast about original TV and film productions and its international potential. I'm your host, Eric Y. Lapointe. Let's learn from each other and the experts within our field. Hello, James. How are you?
Hi, Eric. I'm fine. Thank you. Yeah, doing well. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm so glad that you're here because you are one of the folks that I've known the longest in this TV business since my days in Cirque du Soleil in the 2000s. Sure. So that's very rare for me. And I remember the last meeting we had just like a week or two ago, you started firing off a whole bunch of markets that you go to in Asia that I've heard of, but half of them I didn't. I wasn't aware of. And the reality for people who live in North America or even Europe is that we'll maybe go to an Asian market or two per year, but that's about it because, of course, the distance is so far. So perhaps we could dive right in and then we'll bring back the story to you and you can explain a little bit more about what you've built with Lightning International and your background in the entertainment industry. But how about we dive right in and start talking about all the Asian marketplace post-pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say, is to remember that Asia is not one country, and there are sometimes people's thoughts from around the world, and we talk about Asia that it is one place and one homogeneous place, and of course it's not. It is many different cultures, many different countries, all mixed up together, and frankly, they all have their own set of ways of doing business, of content requirements, audience, demographic, everything. It is different. So it's always important to think about that when trying to bring content into Asia. They range from different regions like Southeast Asia, which consists of Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, these kind of places. North Asia, which you could say is China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong. And then you've got sort of South Asia, which is India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, these kind of places. And then you've got Australia and New Zealand and the Pacific Islands in between. So, it's a huge region and many, many different cultures and content requirements within them.
Yeah, and many different religions too, from one country right next to the other, right?
And as a result of that, of course, lots of different regulations about what you can and can't do or say on your programming. And, it could be political, religious, it could be, things to do with the amount of skin you're allowed to show on the screen, many different regulations.
What would be some of the more open countries where you see they are more open to Western stories?
It's probably many of the ones that you would think of, obviously, so Australia, New Zealand, and
if we count Oceania and all this,
then Singapore, Hong Kong. I mean, have their restrictions, but they're actually quite connected to Western content and concepts. Japan, surprisingly, is pretty open about most things, very little restriction there. Other places, tend to have their own set of restrictions. China, obviously, lots of restrictions about what you can show on video and really regulate the amount of content, the type of content that can be brought in. That's pretty tight. It's a basket of different requirements. And when approaching the Asia Pacific and trying to look at what people want to watch, you really have to think of it like that some things are going to work in one place and some things are going to work in other places. Nothing is forbidden completely, but you just have to find the right audience for it.
Yeah. They've always said the same thing about Africa. Like oftentimes Africa is treated as one region, when in reality, no, it's multiple different languages, multiple different cultures. It's 54 different countries, just like in Europe. But from a North American standpoint, perhaps we say, oh, Africa.
Sure. Well, Asia very, very similar. And of course, it's, huge numbers of population. We are talking about 3 billion people. It is a massive geographic region. And yeah, again, many different languages and lots of obstacles that are put in your place. But one by one, you take them down and bring in the content that you want to bring in and work with the local platforms to find that audience. And most content has an audience, but you just have to find it.
What about Korea in particular? Because it's one where they are clearly so well known right now for creating such great content. And yet I think it's really hard to sell within Korea. I think of all the Asian markets I've ever dealt with, it's one of the markets I've never been able to break into.
I mean, I think it's definitely become increasingly more difficult. And it's not because of regulation of content, it's because of the explosion of content which is produced in Korea. So, naturally, like any country, they want to watch content in their own language. And in the last 10 or 15 years, as we know, this huge amount of content has been produced. And what has suffered is the amount of time that is devoted to non-Korean content. It's been squeezed out. So that's what makes it tougher. It's not that anybody's got anything against the content that's coming from around the world. It's just the platforms, haven't had enough space, if you like, to have it on their channels. That has changed a bit, I think, with the on-demand services. There is much more interest in having content from elsewhere in the world, but nevertheless, as we know, the business models are changing. It's become more challenging to make money in the same way that we used to do. But nevertheless, there are always opportunities, and there are new opportunities coming through, even in Korea.
Now, this trend is also happening in other countries as well. Like I do believe we're seeing better and better local productions in other Asian markets as well. So are you finding that there's other pockets in other countries, like the Philippines right now is producing their own content? Is it getting harder to sell into some of these countries because they've said, you know what, we've figured out how to make our own stories and we're quite proud of them, and we're now going to start exporting our stories?
Look, I think it's always difficult, and it always becomes more difficult, but we just have to find new and better ways to get in there. Look, every country, as I said about Korea, every country wants to have its content in its own language. If you're sitting watching this in the US or the UK or Canada or wherever you are, then possibly your native language is English or French or something like that. And if I bring something over in Chinese to you, and you've got to go and sit and watch subtitles all the time, then you might not be that enthusiastic to do that. And the reverse is true, and we have to remember that. But that doesn't mean to say that there aren't opportunities. There really are opportunities. Philippines, of course, a lot of people speak English. India, a lot of people speak English. Singapore, Hong Kong. So there are places where English speaking content works well still. Then, of course, there are opportunities to create local content based on either factual or drama formats that come from around the world. And those carry well. The ideas, the concepts, of course, work very well everywhere, and even more so when they're translated or produced in local language. So it's plugging this bit of content in over here, and it is really thinking like that. But one cannot do one size fits all. You make one program on one side of the world and you expect it to play out in multiple territories on the other side of the world. Life is no longer that.
Well, we've been privileged in the West for so long to have our own stories. Even here in Canada, I think we much prefer to watch Canadian content over British content, for example. Now it's a good time for me to have a drink. And for those who can't see this because it's in video form, it's a glass of water with the Coronation Street logo on it. I'm going to take a
Coronation Street. Well, that takes me back to my ITV days when I used to distribute Coronation Street to various places. And
So we haven't spoken about these really cool markets that people should be familiar with. And so let's start by listing the top ones. Like for me, the top one in Asia is ATF.
Yeah, Asia TV Forum is probably the longest running, most well-known market. Singapore based, definitely worth attending. But it's not big by MIPCOM kind of standards, but still it's a good gathering of a lot of people that want to buy content and a lot of people obviously want to sell content. Unfortunately, the last couple of years, of course, it's not been happening, but we anticipate that it will probably happen this year. So, fingers crossed that that's the case. But there are other markets as well.
What are your top 5?
They tend to be in-country markets. So there's Film Mart in Hong Kong, which is more specializing, to be honest, in Chinese content.
Does not make it difficult to lure in people from outside of China and Hong Kong, though?
I mean, I think it does. We wouldn't see, even though we're based in Hong Kong, we wouldn't see it as our number one market. Our number one market would still probably be Asia TV Forum. Although, of course, we still go to MIPCOM and MIP TV because, of course, there's lots of people from Asia go to those markets. But so we would say ATF probably in Asia is the number one. Film Mart's good, but it's really focused, as I say, on China. So another big market is TIFCOM, which is the Tokyo-based the Japan market, which is normally in October. Great place to meet Japanese producers, Japanese sellers. It works well. Japan is, of course, a very distinct market. Again, like Korea, they are very focused on their own content, and it can be quite difficult to penetrate the Japanese market. Not just with the programming, but sometimes even to just get inside people's minds to make them understand that there is other content from outside Japan.
But they do acquire content from abroad, though, right? And when they do, they pay quite well.
Well, of course, it depends what the platform is. Yes, if you're selling to something like NHK or WowWow or one of the big players, the numbers are quite high. However, the smaller players, the numbers aren't as big as you might expect. But they are, they have a very good market in on-demand services at the moment. Hulu Japan does very well. Unext, some of the other big platforms that compete with the ones that we know, like Netflix and Amazon Prime and so on. But Japan has its own set of on-demand services. It really has taken off in Japan. Markets in Korea, BCCW, BCM, I think, Eric, you're aware of those, obviously.
Well, one of them, which one is better?
Well, in a perfect world, I would say to them both, I think you guys should merge, because I think it's quite difficult to say one is better,
Or why do we need 2 of them in Korea?
It's really to do with funding. I mean, the funding does change a bit, but in the past, BCM is really funded by Busan, which is the second city in Korea. BCCW is Seoul-based. And of course, they have local governments that want to do different things. They're trying to promote their city as the place for the content business. It would be better, I think, from an outside perspective, and perhaps from just a I would say sort of common sense perspective, if the two merged together and had one market. But I'm not sure that's about to happen. But nevertheless, they're both interesting markets. I mean, there are little markets in every country. The Taiwan TV Festival, India has various things. Australia has, Vietnam. There really are markets all over. You can't expect to do them all.
Sure.
And even for us, we try to go to as many as we can, but we don't go to them. We don't go to them all, even being based here in Hong Kong, and we're only a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours away from most places. Virtual, of course, has been helpful and unhelpful. I mean, unhelpful, of course, because it's very difficult to press the flesh, so to speak, and see people in person. And it's always good to do a little bit of that. But helpful, of course, because you can, of course, still connect with people that, I don't really want to have to go to Vietnam every other day, much as I like it. It's a lovely place and everything. I can't go to everywhere every day. So for us, actually, I think a hybrid model works quite well going forward, where we do a bit more virtual and still do, a high degree of face-to-face at the same time.
I think once we get out of this mess that we're in right now, it is going to be great, because now people are used to this, are used to like meeting on Zoom. So what I did find, though, during the pandemic is that there were perhaps too many Zoom meetings, despite the fact that some of these broadcasters didn't have quite the budget that they used to because of, lack of advertising dollars and whatnot. But once we find that new balance, you're going to be able to go to a few select markets per year and then enjoy those Zoom meetings, because they're going to be very productive.
I think just the previous experiences at MIP, I love going to MIP, and I've been going to MIP for as long as I can remember. But, I think MIPCOM 2019, we did 82 meetings in 4 days. And I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Even if you allocate a half hour, you've only got 20 minutes, frankly, the most, with any one client. And trying to get all your thoughts into 20 minutes and then immediately go to the next one right after that, and then the next one after that, and the next one after that, and make any sense of it. It is pretty crazy.
It is intense, but so much fun.
Oh, no. I'm not saying I don't enjoy doing it. It's great to do, but at the same time, I appreciate what you've just said. And that gives, having a bit more time to spend with people and not being quite so frenetic going into every meeting, is definitely beneficial. And you can take the time to listen to what the client is saying. And that of course is the danger in a seller buyer environment, that the seller just talks too much and doesn't listen to what the client actually wants. And so and in 20 minutes it's very difficult to do that. If you've got 40 minutes or something maybe on the Zoom, I find it's more useful in some ways.
It's different, and it's almost accepted to be fast paced in that market environment compared to Zoom, where maybe you shouldn't pitch too many things on one call and just kind of take a break and catch up another time in 2-3 weeks kind of thing. Before we move on to our next subject, which is, future opportunities in Asia and what kind of trends you're seeing, let's come back to you and introduce you a little bit more to our audience. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it's like you are one of the longest partners that I have known in the TV business, 2000s basically. Why don't you kind of walk us through how you even got into the entertainment in the first place before we talk about how you built your own company?
I started in radio as a kid. I got involved in my local radio station. I was living in the south of England in the UK. I got involved in the local BBC local station there on a voluntary basis and got sucked into it. I then, through that experience that I gained at the age of sort of 14, 15, 16, I managed to get a job as an audio sound engineer at the BBC in London. The moment I turned 18, I was attending the BBC's engineering training centre and learned how to become a what was called a technical operator. What in fact that meant was working the other side of the glass from the DJs on the BBC national radio stations in the UK. So became very familiar with audio and sound desks and so on, but also in dealing with presenters, who were quite difficult actually. Some of them, these DJs who have big egos. I spent 10 years doing that, basically working in all aspects of studios and learning the business production. So on, particularly on the radio side, I started doing some journalist stuff on the freelance side, and sort of got my fingers into sort of lots of entrepreneurial pots while, be honest, still working as a core job at the BBC.
So was it radio itself that pulled you in, or were you a music fan?
Both, actually. I've always been a music fan since being a little kid. But this business of speaking into a microphone and having a lot of people hear you the other end, I thought, as a teenager, I thought was fascinating. It was amazing that you could do that. And this is in the days of proper radio stations, and everything was FM or AM broadcast. It seemed sort of a minor miracle that you could sit in a studio talking to a microphone and 10 million people could be listening to you the other end. And so I just became fascinated with the medium.
We have that in common, because I didn't know that about you and you didn't know this about me, but I started my journey into the entertainment world through college radio. And I wasn't necessarily very good at it, but but I loved it, right? It's like the same thing that you just described. The idea of broadcasting your voice through the airwaves was just absolutely fascinating. And for me to help promote, independent bands and whatnot was just so much fun to do. So how did you get into TV then?
After working for the BBC for 12 years, I ended up in Japan in 1996 without a job. At that point, I was kind of oh, here I am in Japan. What am I going to do? What does an English-speaking, not Japanese-speaking person do in Japan? Bearing in mind that a lot of people in Japan do not speak English, and it's tough. So I was fully expected to be teaching English, or possibly doing some modeling. I know that sounds a bit weird. You wouldn't expect me to say that probably, but
I need to see pictures now.
what foreigners do, is Japanese need foreign people to model for adverts and that sort of stuff. So I was expecting to do that, and I was expecting to teach English. That's the only thing I could do. But in Japan, they have a newspaper called the Japan Times. On a Monday, they have a jobs column. This is, an English newspaper, and everybody who's English speaking always looks on a Monday, or used to do look on a Monday to see what ads there were. And one day I happened, only after being there for 3 weeks, I was very lucky. I saw this ad, wanted TV and radio reporter for this company I've never heard of called Bloomberg. And at that point, no one had heard of Bloomberg. It was a tiny little company, financial company. It was nothing at that point. And luckily, I applied for this job, and Bloomberg was just starting its TV and radio business around the world and literally was launching. And I just, right time, right place. They needed English-speaking reporters in Tokyo to do radio and TV. Within a couple of weeks, I was then doing radio reports about Japanese financial markets for New York and across the US on the Bloomberg radio network. And we were doing 64 bulletins a day. So it was dropping at the deep end. And then soon after that, we started doing TV, and not only doing the radio, we were doing the reports for TV. I then got sucked into that. I then became the programs manager for Bloomberg in Asia, and developing the TV networks and creating the 24/7 programming that came from Asia.
That sounds like a lucky break, but at the same time, you warranted that lucky break because you took a shot and went to Japan for reasons that we'll find out maybe in the future. And now I know we've got limited time today, so I'm going to skip ahead, and we're going to skip over your ITV days when we met and go straight to lightning. Why did you decide to start your own distribution company?
Well, I think it depends a little bit on Bloomberg and ITV, and to an extent the BBC. I basically spent 25 years in big corporate roles. Working for the BBC, working for ITV, working for Bloomberg, which is all very well. But to be honest, I was a bit bored of navigating those corporate responsibilities and forever the corporate politics, which inevitably are there in big companies. You can't avoid them. So it just came to the point I just wanted to do something that I could control. My most recent experience at that point was I spent 5 years at ITV, setting up ITV's office in Asia. ITV didn't have an office in Asia before. We created the office and rolled out the programming, finished programming formats across the region. And what actually happened was quite a few people came to me during my time at ITV, small producers and various other content owners from across the region, and said, "Oh, we would like ITV to sell our programming." And I did do quite a lot of work with the acquisition people in London to say, can you acquire this stuff? I mean, one or two bits were acquired by ITV, but frankly, most of it they turned down for whatever reason. It didn't suit what ITV was doing for whatever reason. And I just felt there's an opportunity here. These people want to get their content out there. They need to get to a wider audience. They're producing great stuff, but it's not getting out. And I thought, perfect opportunity. I want to set something up. These people want to do something. Let's put it together, create this company. So 2011, we put together the company. And
how many employees do you have now?
So now we're up to 12 employees, with partnerships in many different Asian countries. And it's, the business it's been tough. It's been up and down. Anybody that runs a small business knows it's all about cash flow. It's all about day-to-day existence, whatever it is you're doing. And we all know that the TV licensing business is up and down. You can have good days, good weeks, good months, but you can definitely have bad days, bad weeks, bad months. And, obviously the last couple of years hasn't been easy for any of us. It's been difficult, and the business models are changing at the moment as well. So it's good, but we have, 30 plus producers that we work with. We've created very diverse content of different types of content from all around the region, all around the world, bringing content in from outside Asia into Asia, taking content from Asia outside. And we also have a channel distribution business as well. And that has actually supplemented our program distribution business, because channel revenues from selling and representing channels, creating channels, tends to be more consistent than the revenues that you get from buying and selling programs. So putting the two together has been quite good for us.
I think you're well positioned for growth, because at the end of the day, channel sales is part of the future of distribution, not just individual, program sales of selling one series or one documentary at a time. So, all right, let's come back to Asia now and kind of talk about the future trends and what you're seeing right now. Let's start with OTT.
Asia for future trends is a bit like we said about Asia not being one country. Every country within Asia has a different set of ways of distributing content traditionally, and if actually, let's just step back before OTT. Even in cable and satellite world, some countries had better satellite distribution for their channels and their programming, and some had better cable. Malaysia, no cable at all, only ever did satellite. China, very deep cable satellite band. Australia, huge area, very difficult to cable. So every country has different ways of getting its content out there, and that's meant that selling has been quite a patchwork of different things in different places.
Right.
And even with OTT now, the problem is, of course, still that the issue of broadband is really important. And some countries still have much better broadband than other countries. Here in Hong Kong, we have amazing broadband. In my office, I have 3 1 gigabyte connections, and I think they're going to upgrade one of them to 2 gigabytes in the next short while. There's no problem at all with broadband. But if you go to Australia, it's terrible. In the middle of the distances are so wide that it's really difficult. In Sydney and Melbourne, it's fine. But if you're anywhere else, it's a struggle to get the kind of speeds that we know around the world. And of course, we're talking about first world countries, if you like, or first world places when we're talking about China and Hong Kong and Australia. But then, of course, if you go into Thailand or the Philippines or Cambodia or Vietnam, then it varies considerably. So OTT is good in the places where the broadband is really good. Korea is good, Japan is good, but Bangladesh don't expect it. So those on-demand services are really dependent on the delivery speeds, particularly. So it does vary. But the big services, Netflix, of course, is available in most places. Amazon Prime is available in certain places. Amazon doesn't really have big distribution centers in every country. For instance, here in Hong Kong, no one buys anything on Amazon. Nobody local buys anything on Amazon at all, because it all has to be shipped from overseas. There is no Amazon distribution. Yeah, so there's no point having Amazon Prime. In Japan, it's huge because Amazon does massive distribution.
And I believe in India too, right?
Yeah, India is big, but of course, Amazon is not in China. Taobao and so on are the big retailers in China. And of course, so you've got a whole different set of OTT providers in China as well. It's completely different. I mean, none of the Western providers are in China, just not allowed. And then you are starting to get some in-country OTT providers that are specific to individual countries. Japan is the obvious example. Korea has quite a few. There are smaller ones popping up in other places. OTT is definitely on the way, but it's not at the state yet of much of the rest of the world. And we're not, for instance, seeing yet the fast channels being huge here. They will be. Fast channels have developed with some of the TV providers and Roku and Samsung TV Plus and so on in the US and in other places. And they're much further ahead in those places than they are in much of Asia. So there's lots of different angles to it, lots of different aspects. It is different in different places, but lots of opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, that's super exciting because not only is there this new kind of emerging opportunity with OTT, the old traditional business is still alive in many of the countries that you work in.
Definitely, yes. I mean, I think there has been a lot of talk about the death of linear. And look, obviously, there's less focus on linear than there was. But I think we are still certainly seeing in Asia, there's a lot of people still watching linear television alongside on demand. On demand hasn't replaced linear, it's supplemented it. And people are watching both. Certainly in Hong Kong, TVB is the dominant provider of Cantonese drama programming in Hong Kong, and who is not watching the nightly drama? 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. Everybody's still on TVB, but outside those hours, maybe they're watching some Netflix, maybe they're watching something else on demand. It's definitely a mix of those things, and I think from our perspective as a distributor, we're definitely looking at it as an opportunity. There are more people want more content on more platforms.
I think ultimately, a lot of these fast channels too are linear. So I think people still like the lean back approach in terms of how they consume content. And one thing that I've always said in my entire career is I've never accepted the idea that something is going to completely die. It's going to diminish greatly. And this loops back to our conversation about radio. For the longest time, we were told, radio would kill the newspaper. And then TV would kill radio, cable would kill TV, and now OTT will kill cable. All these things are going to continue to coexist. They're going to diminish in some ways. I mean, radio has diminished greatly, but I don't know if you're like me, I still get in the car, I still listen to traditional radio rather than bothering with CDs and whatnot.
It does differ in different places. If you look at the UK, radio is booming in the UK. It's absolutely booming. And the ad market is very strong. So it does vary so much from country to country. I don't want to stick on radio particularly, but in Japan, radio's never been very, very strong. There aren't many radio stations in Japan, but it never has been. But it's the same. It hasn't got any worse, hasn't got any better. But definitely people are just consuming more content in more ways, on the move, whenever. 30 years ago, you couldn't listen to content on the move in your ears. Now you can. So people listen at every point, watch at every point. Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, so many people sitting on the transit systems, watching videos live, a lot of it live now. So on their mobiles, so much of that goes on. A lot of Asia is about public transportation. And so there's increased interest in content, and reaching the rural areas is getting better. So.
And the formats and the platforms, everything changes. I mean, this very podcast is essentially an old school idea. It's radio delivered through the internet.
This of course is a perfect example of reaching niche audiences. Let's face it, the folks that are watching this are probably in our industry, and that's a niche delivery of content, and that's what we're doing. What everybody in our industry is doing is now focusing more on those niche deliveries of content than we ever were before. It used to be mass market, millions and millions and millions of people, but now there are small pockets of people that are interested in certain things, and that is a great opportunity.
Yeah, for all producers out there, for sure. James Ross, thank you so much for spending your morning, my early evening here in Vancouver. You're in Hong Kong. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome, Eric. Nice to be on the Global VID Podcast.
Thank you.
That concludes today's episode of Global VID. Word of mouth exposure has been essential to our growth, so if you like today's topic, please share with your friends and subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast app or YouTube. Thanks to our guest today, James Ross, our editor Nicole Almeida, and the theme song composers Amber Goodwin and Aaron Ross. Have a great day, everyone.